there's one Yahweh. So conclusion, well, God is one who. And if we define who, or we define person, we define the word person as who expresses nature, well, then God is one person. And so what we're having here is this creed of Judaism, this creed of monotheism is not just a defense of monotheism only, but also that this monotheism is unipersonal. There's one person or one who, and that who is Yahweh. So that's what I was trying to express. I said a lot more than that, but me and the Lord were having a great time here while I was staring at my phone, just talking to him, I guess. But brothers, what do you think about those points? Am I talking crazy? What's your thought?
Well, I think I had your back as far as saying that something similar with using the Greek, and you backed it up as well the other night. But yeah, it's kind of like Yahweh onlyism. You know, we're called Jesus only right now.
Yeah.
Kind of a statement of Yahweh onlyism. I think they're right on. And yeah, that's it, bro. I agree. Amen. I think that's good because I believe it is a statement of ontology as well, because it's saying specifically, Yahweh one as in only one, still a singular one. And of course, we do have the haste with masculine. It has gender, has and numbers, masculine, singular in the Greek, in the Septuagint, as well as in the New Testament, as well as you go to a bunch of other passages. You know, I wasn't able to speak very much, but I think both because I was busy and because we got rolling with a lot of people weighing in. And what was I about to say? Oh yeah, so I think this just proves definitively that Yahweh is not an owl. Just kidding. But definitely not three who's. But my favorite who passage is Isaiah 44:24, because it has even beyond that, I'm looking at like 27, 28, all the way to 28. There's way more than three who's, and you can only have three who's for an owl. To be an owl, it can only be a who. But if you have 2 or 4 plus, it's not an owl anymore, bro. So, of course, we know this. I'm just going to read it because I wanted to say this. It's so fun. I love these. And thus says Yahweh. Oh, same Yahweh. Same Yahweh. Your Redeemer, and He formed you from the womb. I mean, singular personal pronoun kind of rules out the whole thing. Okay, let's hear him talk. I am Yahweh who makes all things.
Ooh.
You know what? And then you can divide this. In 24, there's 3 who's. Okay, so who makes all things? And you know how we're supposed to take verses out of context. I mean, it's one of the Trinitarians. I am the Lord who makes all things. Who stretches out the heavens all alone? Who spreads off the earth by myself? Of course, keep reading it straight all the way. I think I said 28 or 29. There's a lot more. Who frustrates the signs of the babblers? Who turns the wise men backward? Who confirms the word of the servant? Who says to Jerusalem? Who says to the deep? Who says of Cyrus? But even just right here in 24, the 3 who's that we got does not prove 3 verses, because this Yahweh is a he. And he says, I am Yahweh who makes all things, and that who, as well as the other who's beside that are attached, that are with the next 2 clauses, that he creates everything alone and by himself. Every one of those who's is also a singular personal pronoun. Those who's are singular and personal as well, so they show exactly how many persons this Yahweh is in the grammar of the pronouns used.
Yeah, and I mean,
right.
Additionally, go ahead, Brother Brandon.
No, I would just, when it comes to that point of, and just let you know, I did connect my stream too, because I said, this is already sounding like a good talk. When one of the things, like, like Brother Rodney was pointing out, because we hear so many times, like all the claims of like three who's and one what, when you hear God give his own self-disclosure in the Old Testament, especially, who is like unto me, who is my peer. It seems like if it's any way he wanted to discredit the idea of multiple who's, like he did it preemptively before, that this isn't the way he see himself. And I guess earlier to your comment related to Deuteronomy 6:4, and my approach sometimes is a little bit different. And I know sometimes we say things in an apologetic frame, like, well, of course, I don't believe the Old Testament is giving credence to a Trinitarian view of the Old Testament. I believe it's extremely unipersonal. But I think sometimes when we kind of make it seem like they were arguing the oneness of God in the Old Testament, sometimes I think we're giving those who disagree with us too much credit. Because I think sometimes what it does inadvertently, it make it seem as though their argument is more legitimate than what it is from the heritage of the children of Israel. Because they're like, they're arguing, is Deuteronomy 6:4 about the Trinity, or like, is it about explicitly explaining the nature of God? To me, I say, of course, it's not going into super detail, because based on the surrounding context, Deuteronomy 1:6, and when they recount the God who appeared to them at Horeb, the unipersonal, and that's a reference to Exodus 19, when it was the Lord who came down in the cloud. There would have been no doubt in their mind, like, who would have been asking if God is more than one person? When it's in that context, the elders of Israel ate with the children of the God of Israel, ate with the children of Israel. Who would have been asking? Like, I wonder how many persons is he? And so I guess sometimes I've kind of rethought that. I'm thinking, like, who would be arguing about God being one? I think the emphasis on serving and being faithful to that one. But I guess that was kind of more my conclusion looking at it, because I'm thinking, like, who would have been arguing that after? Because they just would have seen this, like this. If you were looking for a more unipersonal theophany, it references it in direct context. And I guess that's why I wonder, sometimes, are we shooting ourselves in the foot by, sometimes we can say our Trinitarian friends are eisegetically interpreting their theology in the Old Testament. Could it be at times that we are eisegetically interpreting our how can we say, we're in our minds arguing something that nobody would have been questioning? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, so you're saying essentially, it like what is it, anachronistically, we're kind of introducing an argument and a theology that did not exist, as if it's competing with these verses. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Right. I don't think that there would have been a struggle for them to understand that, however God is, he's one, and he's revealed himself as a one person. Now, how expansive he is in this person, how he is and what he does, how his fluidity works, all that. No, it didn't go into detail, but how could they go all the way from Exodus 19 and 32, where God says, and again, and then I just asked the Trinitarian this the other day, Exodus 32, when he says, I will send my angel in front of you, for my name is in him. And I asked him, I said, okay, if every time they were talking to God in the Old Testament, it was God the Son, then who was that talking when he said he was going to send his angel? Like, they must have, well, unless you were saying it was God the Son saying he was going to send God the Son, then they must have been talking to the Father, which the context calls the God of Israel. And I guess that's hopefully I'm not being too wordy, but I'm thinking sometimes they wouldn't have been like, this would have been so far outside of their mind, I guess. Like, wait a minute, what do you mean? We just saw the God of Israel.
Yeah, I mean, real quick, and then I'll give it to Brother Rodney. Just because you just sparked two really good thoughts, like that. I mean, everything you just said was great, but I'm just saying, like, two thoughts, like, oh my gosh, like fireworks in my head. Is, well, one, in the Exodus passage where it says, "I will send my angel." One thing we have to do is keep reading, because he never sends the angel. So like the big Trinitarian argument of, this has to be God the Son pre-existing, or Jesus pre-existing Christ. It has to be because he can forgive sins and he can do all these things, but they need to keep reading because God never sends that angel. He relents. And Moses is like, Lord, don't send this angel because this angel would not forgive. Don't send this angel because we want you. And so that the whole Trinitarian argument of that being that specific instance being a theophany, I don't agree with. And now I've had oneness people even get mad at me about that. Those who are trying to make the angel Lord in all scenarios be the image of God as like logos Christology. And I've even had one of people upset with me with this, but I believe if we are authentic to the scriptures, and we're going right to the scriptures show that he threatens with this angel. He says that this angel will not forgive sins. He says that this angel, he was going to send this angel, but then later on he relents and he does not, and he says he will go. And so I don't see this as logos Christology. I don't see this as the angel of the Lord as a theophany. This seems to be as God was fed up with them. He wasn't going to go with them. He was going to send an angel, but then he relents and he says, then I will go. And so that evidence falls apart for them. And that's really their best angel of the Lord passage for them trying to build this case. And try to build distinction between God and this theophany that seems to be another person, maybe another distinction. But that falls apart when you see that God doesn't ever even send this angel, and he says, I will go. So I just wanted to bring that out real quick. I thought that was something that you just brought out there. And then when we realized, we're like, oh my gosh, he didn't even ever send this angel. I think that makes their argument fall apart. Brother Rodney, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I was paying attention to the last part you said, I promise. But it reminds me to say one of the things I always teach how to evaluate a theological position, especially, first of all, is it based on the text? Is it in the text? But what we want to ask, if the text is presented, is what does the text say and what does the text not say? So that's very important. And then I think the rejoinder as far as, this text is not about oneness or Trinity is an excuse that's been levied by maybe a not so great argument that's been levied by Trinitarians because they can't, I don't know, they don't have much legs to stand on even one, let alone multiple legs when it comes to attempting to co-equal co-eternal person. So as you said last night, they do the same thing to God by saying, well, it at least allows for compound unity. I mean, if we interpret it, God, metaphorically, but then we need a reason to do that. Like, let's really think about this and use our brains and see how language really works. Not just, I guess we can just assign a metaphorical meaning to it and make it, God is like an army, like a team, like a married couple. I mean, you got to have a reason for that. So I think it's illicit because no one, going back to the Shema, no one who comes to a Trinitarian and hears that rejoinder, well, they're not really answering the oneness versus Trinity question. So that's an anachronistic fallacy. No one is saying that it is. No one is saying that, Deuteronomy 6:4 is written to address Trinitarianism, so that's why it destroys Trinitarianism. That's a straw man as well. Because what we're saying is that it precludes it from even developing. We admit, we understand, we know it, that the doctrine didn't exist back then. And that's our point. That's our whole point. But they want to go back into those exact times and try to fit it in. It doesn't work that way because we're saying that the foundation laid in the Old Testament. And it's important that we go in and say what we actually are saying and not just scratch our heads when they have these rejoinders that are, the multitude of words, but they miss the point. We're laying the foundation that the Old Testament presents a singular, unipersonal God that doesn't allow for a Trinitarianism to be true, that's fully personal, it whether it develops, 3 years into the future or 3,000 years into the future. So it's important that we're clear on what we're saying. That whole accusation that's anachronistic, I think it's a mute point. It's a mute point because nobody's saying that. Their rejoinder is an answer to something we're not even saying, which completely misses the point and eisegetes what we're saying after they want to brutally eisegete and abuse the biblical text. So is that clear the way that I said that? Nobody's actually saying that Trinitarian is being addressed back then. So why in the world would a Trinitarian say, Mr. Oneness person, you can't use the Shema because the Shema was not written to address Trinitarianism. Nobody's saying that. We're saying it's written to show that there is one God who is exclusively that one and only God. And now let's go to Isaiah 44:24 and show you how that one God is a singular, personal being.
Yeah, that's real good, brother. And also, welcome to our brother Marcus. Praise the Lord. I always love how brother Marcus, he always has such a fun spirit, man. I always love listening to him talk and just rejoicing every time he comes on. Brother, if you want to join the stage, feel free. I wanted to add to that, brother. Amen. Yeah, we're not saying that Moses is like, hey, I got to write this to combat those who are thinking that God is multiple persons within one being. Amen. And Trinitarians who are trying to just brush it away and say, well, this isn't talking about that, therefore it's not valuable. It's like, well, hold on, you just took an extra step there. And I like how both of you guys are bringing that out, is that, yeah, that is taken. You guys are going too far then with the next part that you just said, because, well, it's precluding it. It's making the creed is so definitive that we shouldn't accept the Trinity that developed much later down the road. I think that's those two really solid points. It's not addressing it, but it's also precluding it. I like that you guys brought that out, and hopefully I'm saying that correctly.
I think that's a good way to say it. It's not addressing it, but it's precluding it. I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. And I guess my view of it is just trying to make sure in my apologetic approach that I'm trying to make sure I'm operating the same standard I'm holding them to. But I think the way you said that it was not addressing it, but because of what it is stating, it is precluding it. And of course, I think the strongest preclusions to build on what Deuteronomy 6:4 is saying is the surrounding context of if I was a part of the children of Israel that was having the second retelling of the law before they go to the promised land, before the time of before the transition with Joshua. And I am a part of the children of Israel that are hearing this admonition as encouragement to get this thing right. Your fathers failed at it the first time they hear it. Now you're hearing it again for the second time, based upon, and again, just saying from my point in history, based upon everything I've seen, what would I have been thinking? I would have been thinking about the past experiences. I would have been thinking about everything God said. And so it'll be at that point that everything I understand I've been revealed about God as far as new numbers is concerned, like it's already been established. He is one. And if I'm trying to understand who the he is, I fail to see how a person, especially, and I get sometimes when people go to New Testament, they're trying to merge, because what they realize, they have a problem, because now they have to get both of the testaments to align. And if what they're saying is true, we have a contradiction of sorts. But if I was a person that was hearing that, what other conclusion could I have? And I know people play that progressive revelation thing, but I think we have to, and of course, and I'm saying this in the context of conversations I've had with those who disagree. What revelation could now be used to supersede? Like, how could I move progressively to multi-personalism from this unipersonal foundation? Like, what would be the theological basis or the scriptural basis that would appeal to me as a person that is rooted in this sojourning through the wilderness? I don't know, it's interesting, especially like when you talk about these instances of the angel of the Lord and various instances, which there are a handful of them, I would say, yeah, these are probably theophanies. But I don't know. It's just really sometimes hard to me. And of course, as a strong of a statement as Deuteronomy 6:4 is on God's unipersonal nature, I guess, and I was thinking about this earlier, and I was just thinking, like, where in my mind would I think, based on everything I've heard, when somebody would say to me, God is one, I would have room to think that he was a multiplicity of persons. Like, why would I think that was even an option to still be open based upon what I have just discussed and heard from everything my father's failed at and what my experience is with God, and basically even just what we know how God spoke to us at Horeb, which Deuteronomy chapter 1 brings that in. I mean, at verse number 6, the first chapter makes that very clear. The Lord who appeared to us at Horeb. So if I want to know who that Lord is, my mind goes back to that. I guess I'm thinking, like, how in the world would I think you could progressively move from that?
Yeah, agreed. I mean, and then I want to hear from Brother Rodney next, but I agreed. That's the thing, is they have to try to make the two testaments harmonized, right? And like you guys brought out, they have to try to make the two testaments harmonized. But what they're doing now is they go back to the Old Testament, searching, looking, and that makes them so wide open to confirmation bias, because they're going to look everywhere to try to find it, and so they're going to have to really bend and twist and stretch a lot of things to try to find it, because they're trying to look for it. And so what you're getting a lot of times in their explanations of things is really coming from that psychological confirmation bias. Anytime they see something that possibly could, and you talk about anachronistic, I mean, that really is looking backwards, trying to find it somewhere, anywhere, to confirm what they are already assuming, their presupposition. So I think that's what we're seeing a lot of times, where they go back into these passages trying to find it with this angel of the Lord, saying, oh, well, look, at this angel of the Lord can forgive sins, but it doesn't say that he can. He says he won't. So that's a stretch there. But when you're looking with that confirmation bias lens, you're going to be stretching and bending and twisting things to try to confirm what you've already presupposed. So I'm gonna throw that to Brother Rodney if you're ready, bro. What you got, man?
Yeah, that was really great, Brother Brandon. You know that, well, both of you, but I'm gonna respond to what you said, Jordan, a little bit. But you guys get what I'm saying? Like, sometimes we have to I don't know how to say it, but we have to hold people's feet to the fire. But we also need to bring a measure of wisdom. So, like, you can't just say anything. You know, if they come bring it, that's anachronistic. That Deuteronomy 6:4 was not written to address Trinitarianism or any kind of fallen personal or plurality in God. Why are you saying that? You know, we should be able. Why are you saying that? Nobody ever said that. Nobody made that claim. And the reason that they're saying it, they might not even know it, is that they're trying to weasel their way in without addressing you bringing up Deuteronomy 6:4 and weasel their way into it, get around it, and try to sneak in a possibility of morality, because that's where they really want to go. And so we've got to be able to identify that. I'm a big advocate. I just want to advocate really loudly for pointing the finger at exposing their techniques and what they're doing, because they get away with it a lot and they leave heads scratching, and it's just not proper. It's not decent. It's fallacious in a lot of ways. We've got to be able to point that out. I think we should spend a lot of our time communicating with Trinitarians and with other people viewing us as well, so that they see what's being done. They see the trickery with the text. And so another one of those is Brother Jordan. We need to do this more often. We need to be labeling confirmation bias, because it is how prolific it is permeates Trinitarian theology and thought and apologetics. That's probably, like, if you were going to use a metanym to describe their whole approach to polemics and apologetics, it's so much a part of it. We could sum it all up and say it's all computation science, just kind of like in an abbreviated sense. We need to start putting that out when that happens, because that is really what. And what would be another term for it when they kind of, wait, you don't believe the Trinity? Wait, don't, and they're just trying to get people, okay, I know we're talking about arguments and stuff, but everybody jump on this bandwagon. This is the Orthodox bandwagon of Christianity. So they're really trying to persuade, propagandize even our hearers in a debate to adopt their method of confirmation bias. Because go look for it. You'll see some clues that make you think it's there. And then all of us will tell you that, yeah, it's really there. We're the witness of the church that confirms you're seeing the right thing. And then we'll go and demonize the Jesus only oneness crowd and not even consider any of their arguments as potentially being biblical position. So we need to label the tricks, because they work too often. I think labeling it, bro, if we can adopt that apologetic methodology, I think it will be effective. I think it will be a real blessing also to people who really want to learn theology, but they're hindered by just by Trinitarian apologetics in general.
Good stuff, brother, and welcome to Brother Freddie. I'm inviting you to the stage. If you change your mind and want to join the panel, feel free. We always love to hear from you, brothers. So, yes, good stuff, brothers. Just another thought. It's interesting to me that someone would even entertain the idea that, like, the Jews just kind of accepted or just assumed or just like somehow just came up with this multiplicity within God, because it's never explicitly taught in the Old Testament. There's never any kind of, and you could go into, and Brother Freddie is more of an expert on the two powers in heaven scholarship, but essentially, like, just to have this idea of this multiplicity within God, within one person, is really, to me, it seems super foreign. And the reason why I'm going to say that is because of this. Elohim, that word for God, Elohim, it's pluralized, but it's actually a specific type of pluralization. It doesn't mean multiple, right? We all know this on the panel. We all know that Elohim does not necessarily mean gods as a plural, right? But it is pluralized. And so some people have said, well, that's the plural of majesty. And some people have argued in the past, well, that can't necessarily be a plural of majesty, because that's more of a literary tool that's used much later. Maybe the earliest account of that would be like in the Byzantine era, much later in the Victorian era, where you see the plural of majesty. However, in Hebrew language, pluralization happens all the time. It happens all the time for like random words, anything that's grand. For example, like water, mayim, that's plural. Life, chaim, it's plural. It's all over the place. There's pluralizations for the sky. Shamayim is the sky. I mean, that's plural. Anything that's so big, but it's one thing, but it's so grand, it receives an honorary pluralization. It receives this pluralization that's saying that this thing that we're talking about is so grand. But specifically for the word Elohim, and this is where I'm going to land my point here, is that for the word Elohim, it's not only just that God is so grand that he receives this pluralization, but specifically what the word Elohim means. So it's pluralized, yes, but it comes from Elohe, which is the elongated form of El, which just means power. And the reason why I'm bringing this out is because in the world that Judaism, started in, God started a nation, and it was surrounded by pagans. It was surrounded by polytheism, and God introduces, he forces into the world a new nation that is going to be preaching monotheism, and it's foreign. It's rare. It's everything around it is everything around it is polytheistic. And one of the things that they would do is that they would see, oh, look at the moon. The moon is different than the sun. So that the moon is the one God because it has certain characteristics and certain qualities. And so the moon, it's one God because it's different than the sun. And then the sun is a different God because it's fire,
Right.
and the moon is different. And then you have fire. Well, maybe that's a God, and maybe ice is a different God, or water is a different God. And they would have gods for each power.
Exactly.
And since they had gods for each power, and every power had a God, they would have individualistic persons, individual gods over individual powers. But in Judaism, it's saying, no, there's one God of all powers. And so the pluralization is both for his splendor, but also for the fact that he is all powers, all of those powers. It's not like he's just the God of one thing. He's the God of all things. And so this pluralization in Judaism is attributed towards God, specifically that he's one person who has all power. And so the idea that creeps in, that it's somewhere in there is an internal distinctions, or somewhere in there is multi-persons or social trinity or any of these things, like, it's so foreign to monotheism as it's described in Scripture, and how it existed, or how God started it, how God revealed it, as a creed, as a belief system, surrounded by polytheism, where they had individual gods existing as individual persons over individual powers. So it's all been individualistic, but they just had it split and categorized among all these different powers that they saw in the world. But God is the singular God, the singular person over all powers. And so I guess I just wanted to bring that out. I want to hear what you guys think about that. But I just wanted to bring that thought, that we've been talking about individualistic thoughts throughout human history, of a singular personal God over that, a singular personal God over that. But Judaism brings out, no, there's just one singular personal God over all powers. What do you guys think about that? Take your liberty.
Well, I was going to say, because I think this is a good thought. I was going to hit on the first thing you introduced, which was seen in Genesis 1:26. And one of my thought processes, I'm always looking, I guess, for ways within the biblical narrative to be true to give answers or explanations, or give a more well-defined or robust apologia for different ideas. And I know we have, of course, our classical answers that we use as far as answering Genesis 1:26. But I was thinking, as it relates to which he's starting to get some criticism now, oddly enough, that he's gone, but the late Michael Heiser, he popularized the view during his lifetime, called the Divine Council view. And of course, Michael Heiser is a Trinitarian, and I don't agree with him on everything. But with the Divine Council view, I guess my first thought on that, could this be a possible way of explaining the plurality in Genesis 1:26 that we may not see as much within a oneness apologetic? One, I think it may have, how can you say, a lot of economy of use, seeing that it's not saying everybody agrees with it within academia, but it's recognized as a plausible answer to what's taking place in Genesis 1:26. And also we could utilize the grammar. We could say, like, when he said to them, like, the plurals that are there, if one wanted to use it, they could use it and say, well, yes, it's a plurality because it's a Divine Council text. And I guess that'd be the first part of my thought. Could this possibly be a way of, we could maybe, and I guess I'm like using more mainline thought. And of course, I'm not trying to take so much of a philosophical approach, but just trying to look at it. Okay, what is a view that is highly recognized that coincides with the oneness worldview, that if they try to shoot it down, they have to shoot their own stuff down? And it was this other part that you were commenting on that I thought was really my thoughts escape me, but I guess I'll stop with the first part of my question and see what do you guys think about the use of the divine counsel view. Oh, and of course, I was going to hit on the two powers in heaven. It's very interesting because Two Powers in Heaven by Alan F. Siegel, The Bodies of God by Benjamin Somer. A lot of these texts are, especially, I would say, because of Michael Heiser's influence, bringing ancient Near East studies from a popular level, has saw a large proliferation of people. Everybody saying ancient Near East now. Uh, I think a lot of these very good works of scholarship are used too energetically to prove a view of the Trinity that the books are not really purporting. Like one of the things when I first heard of Alan F. Siegel's Two Powers in Heaven, like, well, this book proves that there was a Trinity, and I say, well, I don't know if you could say that. What it does show is that there was a diversity of thought in the ancient Near East, in particular the Second Temple period. That's what it shows, which we know that from reading the Bible, that people had different views, like when they started worshiping Asherah. But that don't mean we're going to accept that as correct. So I didn't need Alan F. Siegel to tell me that people were believing things differently, and a lot of times things that were different and wrong. But they are sometimes used against a oneness review, and I think the response should be that we should really respond by maybe using some of these same literature, because when you go and read it, it's not saying what some of them are trying to make it say. Like when Benjamin Sommer on his concerning his book The Bodies of God, where he dealt, I think, in a really good way dealing with the fluidity models, and somebody said, well, he said that this is it shows that the concept of the Trinity is actually, Christianity has its foundations. They could usually, extract it, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, extract it from there. And I guess when you read the surrounding context of what he is describing as divine fluidity, it sounds more like modalism that he's calling the Trinity. And this is just from my reading. And could it be possible that Benjamin Sommer is making the mistake that many of our modern Trinitarian friends are making, calling the divine, calling what he is using as a Trinity is really just a form of modalism? Because I was like, what in the world, dealing with these small scale versions of God's self that can be localized, but it's still his personal self? How is that an example of the Trinity? If anything, that sounds close to what I'm saying. But that's neither here nor there. So just those two parts, using a divine counsel model to explain Genesis 1:26, and the use of popular ancient Near East scholarship like Benjamin Sommer, Alan F. Siegel, and Margaret Barker.
Yeah, and also, I mean, so as far as like with the divine counsel, right? I mean, like with the divine counsel, I, I guess the best way I could put this is I struggled for a long time with what position I was going to take with on Genesis 1:26, because I mean, like I just brought up a few moments ago, I don't agree with, maybe just chalking it up to, kind of, I think David Bernard presents it that way, is saying, oh, this is just let us, like, what are we going to do today? Like talking like in this plural, plural majesty. But, linguistically, I think it could be pretty much demonstrated that didn't really exist until later. Some people try to point to some passages in the Old Testament with, where it seems like there is a plural majesty being used, but it seems like it's just being read in the courtroom. So I guess like I struggled with that because at first I took that, position. And then the second one was, well, do we take like a logos Christology? But then that encourages a distinction. And then I guess the place where I'm at now is I do take a divine counsel perspective here, as far as angels. A lot of oneness people don't like that because, and Trinitarians really don't like that, because there's certain arguments that I always hear in response to that, will saying, well, it can't be angels because of this or this or this. And I think that there's really good explanations of why it could be. One, the most natural use of using second person plural would be when you're talking to someone else. Like that's the most common use is when you're talking to someone else. To jump to say, us is talking to another person within me. That's a stretch. I mean, that's never happened in history unless you are schizophrenic, right? That's never happened in a healthy person's mind in history of talking to another person, unless we're talking about this plural of majesty and how we might use that, but we're not necessarily talking to another person. So I guess like if we scratch out plural majesty and we're scratching out schizophrenia, the most common use of us when you're talking is you are talking to someone else, an outside party. And so if we start there, we're like, okay, well, that's the most common use. That's the most natural use. So let's start there before we just assume a rare use or a use that hasn't occurred yet in history. Maybe it's talking to an outside person. Maybe it's talking to someone else. Well, then the next question will be, who else could there be? And so either you just assume he's talking to another divine person, which the scripture doesn't say, and the scripture doesn't necessarily say who this person is. We have to infer. The next thing would be, well, what other intelligent creature or being would God be talking to? And so we know by scripture that angels were there when the foundations of the earth were laid. We know that God talks to angels. We know that God deliberates with angels. And so because of that, it's a likely candidate. Now, the next part that people say, well, are we in the image of angels? Well, I guess one thought could be, well, there has to be some kind of similarity. One reason why we could say there's some kind of similarity is the Bible often says we look the same. One example would be the scripture says, be careful when you're entertaining strangers. It might be an angel, and you might not even know it. They could look that much like us. You don't even know it. The other thought could be, well, oh, Brother Brandon, you have your hand up. Am I on the wrong point? Just stop me if I'm talking about something else.
No, you're exactly, and I guess that's one of especially when you talk about you being able to utilize the grammar, because I think, especially when explaining the oneness of God, the most simple answer sometimes is, I would say, the most compelling answer. Now, of course, I'm not saying simplicity for winning's sake, but especially like, when you look at the Targum Jonathan 126, and usually you will hear everybody quote Targum Jonathan except Genesis 126 for some reason, because it says that God said to the heavenly angels, let us make a man. That it shows that in the Targumim, this was a thought process, that it was angelic accompaniment. But even if one were to go into, which I don't embrace his view per se, but there is a rabbinic thought that when God said, let us, he was actually talking to the earth. Now, of course, I don't embrace that view. And you rarely hear that, but I kind of lean, and I know some people say, well, are you saying that he's saying that the angels? Well, when you go to verse 27, you start using the personal pronouns again, when it talks about creation, that I create, that he created man in his own image, which to me, it shows that the plurality that was there, that plurality was not involved in the actual creation. And then we can accompany that with the other witnesses from Malachi, creating man all by himself. Deuteronomy, I have created man that is upon the earth. My hands have stretched forth. I think that reading is more simplistic, and I think probably in the mind of the author. Just my thought process.
Brother Rodney, do you want to go, or I can keep going? So, I'm trying to stop.
No, I'm kind of buried in work over here, trying to work. Trying to do some work for you, but getting off here and messing on what is it called? In Clubhouse. So don't tell yourself. What was I going to say here? Oh, I forgot early on. There was a couple of things, but most of what you guys said. Oh, Yeah, you know what? With when Michael Heiser came out, as far as getting real popular with Dr. Stone, I really liked him. I like him. I think they're really great on the Divine Council. I've always thought that way. I've always had that. Like some big epiphany in the evangelical world. That's cool. That's new flash, but I've always thought that way when I read Psalm 82 and God is enthroned above the gods, Yahweh is enthroned above the gods. I was like, I already know that other spiritual creatures out there. We're not the only creatures that He made. There are some different spiritual creatures. Is heaven is also ungodly as well. So I just, I took that for granted, but I really enjoyed the shit that Heiser has given at length, at great length. And early on, I forgot there's something else I forgot I was going to say. But one other point is that I think it's a mistake to say and teach and also to presume what a lot of historical scholars, mostly non-Christian scholars, where it stems from, want us to believe as sort of standard religious history or the historical development of religious thought, and that monotheism evolved out of polytheism. I think that's a mistake. I think the biblical text presents a completely different story, and I think that there's a lot of evidence for it outside the biblical text as well, in history, extra biblical history, as well as astrology and philosophy as well. All difficult. But that monotheism is actually original. So if we get around the time of Moses, or do you refer to the Tower of Babel time? But anyway, from about Abraham to Moses, especially Moses, the Shema, the time of the Shema, I think polytheism had become popular. It had grown and overtaken much of the world. In fact, they were not just adding divine deities, they were adding human deities and deified humans, as well as even living humans at that time. So there was this multiplication of gods going on, and they were still adding, and there was no process of it. But yeah, it was kind of a newer, bad, novel thing. Not saying that it was like within that decade, but, probably maybe 100 years or something like that. But it slowly became the more popular thing. If you go back to the time of Abraham, I think it's not the case. So 200 years prior to Moses, got Abraham, and I think monotheism was still probably dominant at that time, although polytheism existed from Genesis 6 on. Because we see the fear of the one true God, and even the one true God still dealing with Pharaoh, as in coming to him in a dream and cursing him for having Abraham's wife. So, and the same with Abimelech, I think. So, but we don't see, and Abimelech having, and Pharaoh as well, having a fear of the one true God, and an aversion to committing adultery. Far be it from us to commit adultery with another man's wife. Whereas, maybe from the time of Moses, but at least down to our day, we see something vastly different, where, okay, a king or a position of power is marked by corruption and doing what you want, to who you want, whenever you want, without regard to far be it from us, morality, doing what you want. I think we see a clear degradation as far as the growth of polytheism, as well as the degradation of morality, biblically as well as historically and anthropologically. We see that what the actual progression is versus what they tell us, what specifically non-Christian historians tell us, and then the Christian historians, biblicists, Bible scholars echo that, because they don't really test it. They don't really have a bone to pick with that particular view, because they're concentrated on something else. So I wanted to point that out earlier.
Yeah, good point. and good reminders as well, just to kind of look through it and say, well, maybe maybe it's not that the original belief systems were polytheistic, but Romans indicates that it went there. So I like that you brought that out, Brother Rodney. Back to one of the points with Elder Brandon, with the idea of God speaking to the earth, and that man is a shared image between God and the earth. I was relieved to find out later that that was a viewpoint that Maimonides had, the Ramban. I thought I was weird. I really did not know that anyone else thought that, but that was the position I had before the position I have now. And that's in my book too. I thought that was a really good position. I have since kind of dropped that position, and I'll explain why real quick. Essentially, I like that position because when you are looking at, and what the reason why I even got to that position is I was starting to translate word for word in Hebrew, starting in Genesis 1:1, and I was trying to learn Hebrew, and I was trying to translate word for word, and I was just going through word for word in Hebrew and translating, and I was so surprised to find out, because I never knew it, that in Hebrew, when God speaks, he just says light exists. He just says light exists, and you have a sentence like that, there's an understood you, you, light exists, right? And I was like, whoa, he's talking to light. And I was like, whoa, my mind was blown. And I'm like, he's talking to light. And then, later, when he's creating man, he's actually working with the dust and forming man, and seeing that, well, maybe that's what's happening. Maybe he's talking to the dust. Every other time he's talking to things, he's talking to light. He's talking to light and saying, light, you exist. And so maybe he's talking here. Maybe he's talking to the dirt. Maybe he's talking to the earth. And since we're, dust you are, to dust you will return. We are, in the image of God, but also we're made of dust. And so all of this felt so good. It felt so right. But I think the problem is that doesn't have any explanatory power later in Genesis. When the garden, in the garden, when they're getting expelled or about to be expelled, when God says they become like one of us, knowing good and evil, and then sends down an angel to guard the entrance of that garden, that explanation doesn't have the same explanatory power there. And so I was like, that's what kind of got me thinking again. I was like, wait, maybe dust, it would seem like it's the same us, because all of a sudden he says us again in Genesis, I think 3. So I was like, why is there an us that's him in the dust, and now there's another us and we don't know who that us is? So that made me drop that position, because it didn't have explanatory power in both cases. And then if we take the angel perspective, it has explanatory power in all cases. And I was like, oh man, that's a really good argument. And so that's why I changed positions there. So I don't know if that helps at all, but that's kind of how I interacted with that in the past. And I don't feel like it explains anything else other than that one passage, and it leaves the other one still up for grabs. So, but Elder Brandon, you got something?
No, that is my viewpoint. I think it's I think what they may say is a oldie, but it's a goldie. Oldie but goldie. I think it's a good, solid reason. We have evidence from antiquity that would give us a strong basis in it. It aligns very well with the grammar. And and not to say this should be the deciding linchpin if we're going to adopt an argument and use it, because again, many ways to skin a cat, but I just think it's a little bit more simple for a person to understand what you're saying, and a lot harder to deny, because we have like Job even saying we're even the sons of God, saying, and I think it's very easy to dismiss the argument that, are you saying the angels? No, not saying that. I'm saying that he has a divine counsel that he obviously he collaborates with, that he speaks to, that is obvious he's the one making the decree and the decision. I think it's a very I think it's a very cohesive argument that one would probably look silly trying to refute too energetically.
Yeah, and I mean, common objections I hear to the position that it could be angels, of course, is like, you know, about our image, and I already addressed that. But then the other thing was like, well, only God created. You know, angels don't create, don't help create. And I'm like, absolutely, they don't. They do not. In fact, that's why the next verse tells us specifically 3 times in a row that it's only God who did the creating. So, like, making this decision was done in a council, but the action itself was done by God himself. And so, like, I guess that's where, you know, we're like, yeah, absolutely. You know, the angels did not create anything. It's God. It says it 3 times in a row. You know, he created them, you know, male and female, he created them, you know. It's like, it says it repeatedly, single personal pronouns, that there's this one person doing this creating. And deciding something in a council doesn't require everyone in that council to be a part of the execution of what was decided. If you're in a board meeting and you're like, okay, guys, we're going to change the logo, that doesn't mean everyone in the room is going to participate in the changing of the logo. It just means it was decided in the council. So, I mean, like, that objection that Trinitarians come up with, saying, well, then that would mean the angels helped create. I'm like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't. It just means it was decided in the council. And then others who say, well, God doesn't decide things in a council. It's like, well, no, there's plenty of verses where there's even one passage where God leaves the decision up to the angels. It's like, okay, so what are we going to do? And then he leaves it up to the angels to decide what I believe it's the punishment for Nebuchadnezzar. I might be wrong on that, but that might be what I'm referring to, where it's like, you know, what are we going to do for him? And we actually have input. I believe even one prophet has a vision to see in heaven angels appearing before God, giving their opinions of what should occur, and that's just even more evidence that God deliberates with angels. I mean, we see it play out from the prophet seeing it, and I believe that was happening again with I believe Isaiah. Help me out, y'all. I'm sorry, I'm like in mid dinner right now. I believe there's another part where he says, "Here am I, Lord, send me," where he sees it and sees the deliberation occurring. But this,
I think we lost connection just then. Well, we'll probably just take a pause there. Well, thank everybody for streaming. It was a random conversation.
I heard any inaccuracies
that everyone would enjoy. But hey, as always, it's the whole gospel to the whole world by the whole church.